Good afternoon. In this session, we're going to discuss the question of will renewables, and by renewables here we're talking about mainly wind and solar, contribute significantly to the global energy mix and deliver a sustainable energy future. And I say that because we have all dreamed about solar energy and wind energy and the promise that they have to deliver both for the environment, but also to leapfrog other types of technology for decades. And the question we're going to take up in a lot of different ways is what my son used to say to me when we were on long car trips: are we there yet? And that's the question of this panel. Are we there yet with regard to renewables? So let me introduce this very distinguished panel, and I regret that they are not sitting in the order of my notes here, but I will do my best. So on my right, far right, excuse me, we have Patabi Seshadri. Patabi joined the Dallas office of the Boston Consulting Group in 1997. He leads BCG's power and gas utilities sector globally. Impressive. Patabi has been working with a number of energy clients on their renewable energy strategies across various technologies, renewable portfolio performance improvements, partnering strategies, and customer go-to-market planning in distributed generation and behind-the-meter services, new energy source integration, and things like that. Very big responsibilities, very big overview. To my immediate right is Jigar Shah. Jigar, I think many people know, unlocked a multi-billion-dollar worldwide solar industry with a business model innovation, not a new technology. And we're going to get into that in this panel. Are we talking about technology, or are we talking about innovations in business models? And that's a big question to resolve. This model created SunEdison, which we all know, the largest solar services company worldwide. To my left is Sunil Sinha. Sunil is currently the co-founder and chairman of Ensupra Solar and Ensupra India. So we're going to get some of the point of view of India from Sunil. His latest product is Plugged Solar, a ready-to-plug-in solar power system. Sunil has a vision to bring environmentally sustainable innovations and products suited for villages and towns of India to uplift the lives of common people and create a better future. Having held engineering and management positions at several high-tech companies in Silicon Valley, including Adobe, KLA Tencor, and Commerce One, Sunil is now pursuing his dream of social entrepreneurship and research in the solar and renewable energy areas, and we all want to pursue our dreams. So I hope he'll give us some ideas on how to pursue those dreams as well. And, excuse me one second, Michael Skelly on my far left. Michael is founder and president of Clean Line Energy. Michael founded the company with the hope that Clean Line's transmission line projects will bring about thousands of megawatts of new renewable energy projects, and he's doing it nationwide. So, first of all, thank you, panel, for joining us today. So a little about the structure of this panel, and that is, for the first hour, we're going to have a discussion, and I'll ask some leading questions to get the discussion going with each panelist, and I'll ask the panelists to be specific, but I'll also let the panelists challenge each other, because as we learned a few minutes ago when we were all sitting down together, we don't all agree. So it's important that you see how this panel is thinking about the future and get their sense of it. So this first hour will be followed by question and answers with you so that everyone in this room can be considered a participant in the second hour. So I'll call on you, and please wait till you're called on, because we need to bring flashcards and so forth for you to fill out for the questions. So with that, let's begin, and I wanted to begin with Patabi, just to get a sense of where the industry stands right now from a kind of an overview perspective. Patabi.
Thanks, Joel. I guess I drew the short straw, but I'll kick us off here. Whenever I hear the words, "Are we there yet?" especially related to renewables, I always get reminded of one of my favorite James Bond movies from, I don't know what it was, late 60s, early 70s. I haven't been able to YouTube or Google it yet to pinpoint the particular movie, but it was all about, you know, the bad guy getting hold of the solar technology at that point in time and then conquering the world, right? And it's probably been so from the 70s onwards, it's probably about 40. Sorry, does anybody know the name of the movie? There you go. We got a winner here.
It's already participation.
We have Google right here in the audience.
Right. So whenever we get on these panels and we talk about the "Are we there yet" aspect of the renewable industry, I come back to these are long-lived assets. So power generation and energy delivery in general are long-lived assets. So really the thing that we need to look for is, are the changes happening on the margin? Is new capital going on the margin to renewable energy? So just to give you a quick data point on that, I absolutely believe that turn is happening right now, or has been happening for the last 4 or 5 years. Just in the US from 2009 to 2012, to give you a sense, 150,000 megawatts of new capacity was added. And capacity I put in quotes for this reason. A third of it was energy efficiency and demand response. So you can't really call it capacity sometimes, but it is real additions, and it is there in the base. A third of it came from renewable energy, and that's wind and solar rooftop and various other forms of smaller renewable technologies. And only a third of it came from traditional generation, and that's just in megawatt terms, right? But if you look at the capital that went into renewable energy, it's probably more like a 70% share of capital deployments over the last 4 years. So that's a big number. And really, when we think about the "Are we there yet" syndrome, we need to think about, is new capital going on the margin to renewable energy? And absolutely, that is the case in the US and several of the developed markets around the world. That's number one. The second point I wanted to just broadly make is that while the last 10 years have been about policy and regulation, subsidies and whatnot, the next 10 years are absolutely going to be about economics. And I think these technologies have matured to a point where they can, with further evolution, be competitive to grid power, at least at the retail level. So I think we'll end up talking a little bit more about it, but I think we should set aside the last 10 years and say, that was great. The industry turned on subsidies and rebates and whatnot, but I think that's changing, and I think we're going to see a lot more of the penetration coming from economics. What we're seeing globally is economics are absolutely crushing other forms of generation, depending on the market. So if you look at what's happening in Germany, what's happening in Japan, what's happening in Australia, and then what's about to be happening in California, I think it's now more about the economics than it is necessarily just about the regulation itself or policy. So I think the industry is emerging and evolving. It's not, it's not your garage shop industry anymore, and it's actually, if you look at Germany, 8,000 megawatts of solar rooftop installed every year for the last several years, right? And that's big magnitude. So we're talking about an industrializing value chain, and that's important to get this more competitive. And I think the third thing to think about is low prices. People talk about, gas prices and energy prices in the US have come down because of shale gas. And it used to be you needed high energy, high power prices in order for these technologies to be competitive. I actually, I'm of the belief that low gas prices are actually going to help renewable energy long term, because you essentially get down to the brass tacks of competition. How do I get better and better every day? I think it's easy to get a little too focused on just purely the business model and whatnot when prices are high. And when prices are low is when you really start seeing competition. I think we'll be seeing new use cases for some of these renewable generation. And I think that competition will foster additional deployments over time. So I think those are the three broad points I wanted to make. There's obviously some things that need to happen longer term in order for this to take off even more than it has in the last 10 years. And whether that's grid investments, whether that's regulation, whether it's just further technology evolution or whatnot, remains to be seen. But it is turning, and we are right at the point where we're seeing the turn in a big way.
Thank you. We're going to come back to that point on price too, and natural gas. But I want to turn to Michael Skelly about a statement that you made on the phone when we were discussing, when you were saying that 20% of the energy will come from wind, of the electrical energy in this country. And talk a little bit about whether you still believe that and when you think that's going to happen and how.
Yeah, okay, great. Before I go into that, I want to thank the organizers for the opportunity to participate in the conference. And as I was reading through the program, I noticed all the different IIT campuses around India, and I did not see anything about the Houston campus. And I am hoping that you guys are working on that because it really is a wonderful thing that there's so much talent that you're bringing together. And if you could do something to bring this level of technical knowledge to Houston, there's a great need for it and I think a great opportunity. And that's one of the greatest things that Bloomberg did as mayor of New York. And I think the mayor's on your program. Maybe you can bend her ear about sponsoring something similar here in Houston. So anyhow, back to the energy business. So how do we get to 20%? Well, it's as folks know, and just to give folks a background on what we're doing, we are building. I was in the wind energy business, building wind farms all around the country for over a decade. And I spent a short time running for office, and then I started Clean Line Energy in 2009. And if you've been in the wind business, you quickly realize that in the middle of the country is where all the wind is, but that's not where all the people are. So what we're doing is we're building very long distance direct current transmission lines from the center of the country to markets east and west. And each of these can move 3,500 megawatts of power, which is, enough for 1,700,000 U.S. homes. So that's kind of where I'm coming from as I answer this question. And so how do we get to 20%? Well, we are at, just to ground people today, in Texas, you're getting around 12% of your electricity from wind. On a windy day with low load, that number is in the 25% range. In Colorado, they have days when they're getting 55, 60% of their electricity from wind power. So if the question is, are we there yet? In some certain days, we actually overshot our destination. But what does it take to make that happen? Wind, in terms of the economics of wind, with today's tax incentives, in the center of the country, you could get as much wind as you could ever want for about 2.5 cents. If we did not have this thing called the federal production tax credit, we would be just a little bit north of 4 cents, so 4.1, 4.2 cents. So this is very low-cost power. And to get there, obviously, we're in the transmission business, so for us, every problem looks like it has a transmission answer to it. So we think grid is a big part of the equation. Here in Texas, we have built not our organization, but the commission put in place a process that calls for a build-out, and that build-out is really complete. We've built around 6 or 7 billion of new transmission lines in Texas in the last 5 years. That's going to take us pretty readily to 20% by around 2020 here in Texas. That assumes that sort of the same macro conditions prevail. So we're well on our way. To get there nationally, you have to do more infrastructure investment. But it's eminently doable. The capital is there. the technology is getting better and better. And from an Indian perspective, maybe the most exciting thing on the wind technology front is the big advances in sizes of rotors, height of towers, faster control mechanisms, better logic in the wind turbines, so you can really take advantage of some of the lower wind resource areas. So that's sort of a long answer to your question, but we are well on our way.
You mentioned some of the technology pieces in terms of turbines, controllers, and so forth, but Jigar, you mentioned before that we're not really, when we're talking about alternatives to conventional energy, talking about technology anymore. We're really talking about issues like financing, getting the capital, creating the right terms for that capital, and so forth. Do you agree then, or disagree that, well, let me frame it this way. So you're saying that it's not a technology issue, it's a capital issue. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, and thanks for having me here. You know, Michael started one of the largest wind companies in the United States, a company called Horizon Wind, and when you think about his success or my success at SunEdison or Mike Haas at Orion Energy or some of the other folks who've succeeded in this area, our success really came from our ability to bring money from JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs or others to actually fund these wind farms. And you can imagine when I worked at BP before I started SunEdison, and I remember when I was at BP, the CTO would always tell me, we don't do technology at billion-dollar scale unless you have 100,000 hours of testing in one location, right? Which you can imagine, do the math, it's roughly 12 years in one location, right? So they'll do $5 million pilots here and there, but they won't actually do billion-dollar scale until you had 100,000 hours. In the wind and solar industry today, we're roughly at around $200 billion a year of deployment globally. Just to put that in perspective, that's more money than goes into new coal, new gas, or new nuclear globally, right? So we're the largest. If you're an accountant, we make you more money than anybody else does. If you're a lawyer, we make you more money on transactions. If you're an investment banker, we make you more money than the coal industry does, right? So I mean, whatever it is, we're moving huge sums of money. So when you think about moving huge sums of money and where we are today, just to give you an example, like Japan, all of you know, I think, that we had this terrible disaster with Fukushima, and the Japanese have really shut down almost all of their nuclear plants for political reasons. I think most of them are actually pretty safe to turn back on, but they've kept them off for political reasons, and they've had to replace them all with other energy technologies. The Japanese have actually put in place solar programs and wind programs since 1992. Even today, Japan's biggest problem is that they don't trust themselves on a fully renewable grid. It's not that the technologies are not cost effective. In fact, if you look at what Germany has done and other folks have done, we know how to assemble the money. We know how to get that done, and Japan knows it too. Japan will do something on the order of around $18 billion worth of solar this year. So they know how to do that, but their problem is not the technology. Their problem is figuring out how to get finance and business model innovation in, and then the last piece of it is just confidence, right? I mean, the Japanese know what they're doing, as many of you guys know. The Japanese are some of the best engineers in the world. But this confidence around, can we actually run the grid on 20% renewable energy? How do we actually do all that stuff is where the Japanese are hung up. But I think that for those of you in the audience that think that technology is our bottleneck, that's completely untrue.
So to this point, we've had an overview and two perspectives, all of which are pointing to the fact that this is moving very, very quickly. In many ways under the radar. In other ways, it's coming to assume an astonishingly large percent of the production that we have in energy now, particularly electricity. But we also have to admit that there are a lot of people excluded from this. And I want to turn to Sunil, because you're following your dream. Could you tell us a little bit about what your dream is and how you are pursuing it?
Okay. Hi, everybody. Okay, this is slide. So I'll start with, I'm from IIT Kharagpur, and I'll start with my story. So it so happened that when I was growing up, the power cuts, I am from a town, and the power cuts were very frequent. And then we had to land up doing what you see in the left side. So I'm talking about the homes which have all electric homes, and you have massive power cuts, several hours, and many of you have, you agree with me. And then we'll end up with that, okay? And then you get power for a few hours, and then it's gone. Now this is where the town's story. Now let's think about the village story. 1/3, half of the village in India still don't have secure power or don't even have power lines. So that story is most part in India. Now, how to move forward? So I do agree with you that technology is there, but the implementation is lacking. Okay. And I will give you an example on implementation. So it so happened, recently I was in India, and there was a big flood in Uttarakhand in India. I think a lot of people, 40,000 type of people died. So the one project was put solar lights in 1,000 homes. I said, okay, that's an extremely good project to do. So landed up and came up with a system. And then I realized, and then I did the survey, and then I realized that, oh my God, in India, people are putting thousands or 100,000 of solar lights in the villages, and not only in India, but in other developing countries, African countries, many places there are, millions of solar lights are put. And what is the story behind the solar lights? Good thing technology has moved forward. LED has a 20+ years of life. Beautiful. When you think about how long that lights will last, I came to know average 1 to 2 years because of the technology in the battery. So suppose, suppose if I'm in their position, I'm in the village, I don't have light, I have that lantern. Somebody gives me a beautiful light, what you see on the right side, and it breaks in 2 years. Now, my mind is not going to be in the replacement of the battery or thinking about what has gone wrong, but I will leave it aside and get back to what I'm comfortable with. That means it's a technology is still a problem if it is not implemented properly. So what needs to be done is, fine, we are, many of us are engineers, and even if we put little effort of ours in making sure that what we provide, we guarantee the light, forget the technology, we guarantee the light for 10 years, we solved many of the problems. And that is doable. Technology is there already, thanks to the electric vehicles and all battery technologies, and they have a long life. We take that and appropriately put it, manufacture it appropriately, you solve the problem. So we came up with this solution that we said, okay, we are going to give you lights that will be lighting your homes for 10 years, and this is our solution. And by the way, this will cost you 20% more, because it's then then I came to another, no, give your solution, forget about the life. I said, no, if we are doing it, it's a life. So naturally they agreed eventually that we are providing light to 1,000 homes, and now I think we are going to provide for 2,000 homes, 10 years life, bottom line. So I think that is the one story to move forward, and that's why the solution. Puneet, can we get into another one? Okay. Now, so the light, my story of, I'm trying to read and the light goes away. The second story. So I happened to visit my villages during summer or winter, those times, and I sit down there. And when they cook, all the smokes would come. I mean, so when I was a child, never bothered for anything, but tears used to come. Now, left side, that is the story still in most of the villages. or even small towns. And I'm talking about, it's not millions, but it is a big number. I mean, some numbers I have put it, but in reality, numbers are very big. And when you think about across the world, that is the story. So a story is that easily available biomass, call it any agricultural waste or, cow dung cake or whatever available, they burn it, and then smoke comes out, who bothers? The health of women are really affected big way. So how to solve that problem?
I mean, just to be clear, 1 to 2 million women a year die from smoke inhalation from cook stoves.
Thank you, Jigar. Yeah. So now, I happen to be from IIT, so I feel good about many things. And so if we think we just put a small effort, just a small effort, we solve the problem because technology is there. So what we have is with our partner in India. So we have yesterday I came to know that they in one place they sent out 400 what is called chulhas, or the second one that you see, where smoke is not coming out. So they are distributing, and it's not, it's not very high tech, but you don't get a smoke, and it's locally made, and so the local employment, smokeless and cheaper in a similar biomass. This is based on husk, so that is available in the village level. So you solve to that problem. That right side. Now, the second one do require some electric power because there is a fan running. So that's why the mix of solar. So that's why I happen to call it hybrid. So let's call it hybrid because you need a small amount of solar. So that helps. So light and then a small in that. Third, what you see in the rightmost, what we are used to, the blue light, that is a future where we want to do some research with many of you. And I thought about some solutions, so we need to do some research so that the right side, you absolutely get blue flame, what we are used to at our home. So this is the story we are there in the middle, we need to promote much more, and we are going on the right side.
So let's look at that problem as a problem to solve. And what about the big sorts of solar and wind that we have? Will we be able to take care of off-the-grid solutions? Is the technology adaptable to villages? How are we going to address people who are living in off the grid and using, unfortunately, very unhealthy ways to cook and so forth? Michael?
Yeah, well, there's basically two schools of thought on this, and Jigar, you can correct me here along the way, but one is that, maybe we're going to go the route of cell phones where we sort of skip landlines and go straight to cell phones, and go to a distributed generation model. The other is that you build out the grid, and this debate takes place here in the U.S. as well, because there's a line of argument which goes roughly that you can build distributed solar generation and I'm sorry?
Closer to the mic.
Oh, the argument goes that you would build a lot of distributed generation here in the U.S. and obviate the need for grid, and especially obviate the need for folks like me to build long transmission lines. I strongly believe that if you want a lot of efficiency, either in solar energy production or in wind energy production or in gas-fired electric power generation, that scale is really important, and scale is what brings down costs. Now, there are others out there, and I'm sure Jigar will chime in here, who believe that actually distributed is much cheaper. But for my money, you need a grid, particularly given that once you go beyond sort of very limited lighting and so on, electric power needs, refrigeration, for example, is really, really important for people's quality of life. And other types of, as GDP increases, electric power consumption increases right alongside of it. So I am I would say central station and a ubiquitous grid everywhere. But with that,
I mean, I think that the vast majority of the powers that be, I think, agreed with you up until about a year and a half ago. And I think, you know, the World Bank and others, I think, had been pushing this model as well. I think a comprehensive analysis of this showed about a year and a half ago that those numbers have now crossed. And the reason they've crossed is, I mean, for someone like me who was born in India and my uncle's sitting there in the 6th row, that these people have been lied to for many, many years, right? I mean, the people in India have been told for decades that in the next 5th five-year plan, we will have every single village connected, right? Even in many of these villages that they've actually connected power, they've given the mayor of the town power, and there was no household electrification completed, right? So at some point, you start to look at yourself and you say, okay, we can have the conversation about engineering and whether or not the spreadsheet shows that this is cheaper or that's cheaper. But at some point, you can't fundamentally lie to people forever. That you're never going to give them power, right? I mean, forget about India, which a lot of people think may or may not know what it's doing. Let's look at South Africa, right? I mean, people believe that Eskom is one of the best utilities in the world, right? I mean, well-run, very smart people, et cetera. They have not made one iota of progress since Mandela took over in terms of rural electrification of households in South Africa. You're talking about one of the best utilities in the world with close to 20% of the entire population not electrified to the grid. I just think at some point you sort of have to say we are no longer willing to rely on the powers that be that are required to build transmission and large-scale power plants, and that people like Sunil and myself and others who actually feel like we want to take the power into our own hands to solve these problems for the villages that we came from or villages that we care about is going to be a more likely scenario to provide these people with modern forms of energy.
But Tabi, where do you come out on this? I mean, we do know, for example, and it's been an initiative of President Obama to have powering Africa. Mm-hmm. That's one of his initiatives, because growth is not going to happen without electricity. And much of the world is still without electricity. Where do you come out on that?
Well, Joel, while I like the debate between these two guys, I don't know that we need to pick, apple or orange, right? I actually think it's just going to come down to the use cases. I think too many times we get into philosophical debates about, is X better than Y, but I think there's going to be tons of use cases, and I agree, Jigar, that where it's much more difficult to get large-scale generation with transmission power. And by the way, it's taken a long time for people to actually do that, not just in India, in a lot of places, even in the US, and we're not talking about electrification, but being able to get transmission lines built, right? So I think it really comes down to use cases. In some situations when there are resources that are pretty rich in certain areas and that can be productively leveraged with transmission, I think you're going to see a fair bit of that done. And in a lot of cases, similar to what Jigar has been talking about, you're going to see more decentral energy. And this is where I don't get too as hung up on that philosophical debate as much about, where do you see the technologies that already exist create new and new use cases? I mean, think about the U.S. government is one of the largest users of energy in all forms, right? But just taking electricity, the DoD has got multiple hundreds of thousands of installations globally, and they're going to be looking at microgrid type solutions in order to get reliable power to their installations. Whereas in some other situations, they're going to go for more grid power, right? So again, I get less hung up on the philosophical debate, more on where do the economics and the use cases dictate what gets deployed.
Can I just say one thing on that? Is that, I generally agree with what you're saying, but I think that the practical realities on the ground require a lot more specificity. When you think about India, 10,000 megawatts last year were installed of just pure diesel, right? 99 out of 100 economists that you poll right now in India will say that the import costs of diesel fuel into India is one of the major reasons why the rupee has devalued to 62 rupees to the dollar, yep. Right? And so I think this notion that, that there's sort of like, a philosophical debate here, this is a real debate that affects millions of people. I mean, when 600 million people in India lost power because of the power outage, nobody in India recognized that they lost power, because everybody who went to their grocery store, everybody who went to their thing had a diesel generator. They're like, I mean, it's one of those things where I just think that I get so frustrated by the fact that of this incremental change, because we're at a point now where we are bankrupting entire countries. I mean, Jamaica is under IMF receivership because of diesel import bills. And so I just think this notion that, well, there's like this thing, well, we might be able to do what, et cetera. I mean, and it's not just poor people. I mean, Mongolia, for instance, the vast majority of Rio Tinto's plants are diesel generators. Right? The same thing's true with Rio Tinto's plants in Mozambique and other places. So it's not just poor people. I mean, it's also mining industry and others who are using 20, 40, 60 megawatt diesel generators. I just think that we're at a point now where the technology exists. We actually have the business model innovation. We have the capital. And what we have is not enough persistence on our part to say that these people who are making these changes way too slowly are actually bankrupting their own countries because of their inability to move faster.
So let's look at this from the point of view, then there's a political dimension, right? Because we have, you mentioned Germany and parts of Europe and their adoption of alternative energy and the speed at which it's happened. That's all mandated in various legislation and in various regulation. What's the role and how important have the regulations been in this country and in others in order to accelerate the adoption of, let's say, solar or wind? Let's start with Patabi.
Okay. Well, I think, as I mentioned in my opening comments, I do think the last decade, probably will recognize that a fair bit of the deployment was driven by regulation and policy making. And you can say the same thing about some of the bigger developed countries. We look at Germany and in Spain, UK, etc. I do think regulation had the heaviest role in making sure that cost curves and deployments can be shown, and cost curves come down pretty dramatically. And as we've talked about before, it's no longer about the technology. But Joel, to answer your question, I think it's going to be more about the economics going forward. Regulation has a role to play because there's probably some gray areas where it's hard to understand how investment will come in without some clarity around regulation and policy. I think there's probably a piece of this where technology has an additional role to play, especially on storage, because I think intermittency is still being held up as the biggest stumbling block for renewable energy. Whether it's true, right, wrong, or indifferent, it is still at least held up as a big concern for renewable energy. So I think that's the other piece that would need to come into play, technology development and storage technologies of all kinds, both central scale, but also in a very decentral manner.
Yeah. Michael?
So yeah, I agree. Storage is sort of the holy grail. I mean, we do store electricity today. The way we do that is with these things called pump storage hydro facilities, where you pump water up and then you run it back down when you need the power. But I just want to point out that a little bit on the economics here, because even though we're talking about a product that we price in cents per kilowatt hour, we use a lot of it. And those cents add up, and people are very sensitive to those little changes in cents. So just to kind of ground folks in this, at today's natural gas prices of like $4, if you put a little more gas in a gas turbine, you get electricity out the other end at around 3 cents, okay? And you can go build wind farms in the central part of the country for around 4 cents. And that's unsubsidized. And if you want to do solar, unsubsidized, you're at around 9 or 10 cents, okay? So there are real differences in the economics here, and that's why what drove these two industries over the last decade were basically inelastic demand driven by state policies, where states like Texas, and Texas kind of led the way. George Bush signed the legislation back in '99, where we said we want a small percentage of our electricity to come from wind, and off they went. So, and then same thing happened in California, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what's I completely agree with the view that was articulated, that we're moving from this sort of regulatory-driven world to a world where it's more economics. And that's possible because costs have come down a lot. Cost of solar is down, I don't know, Jigger will give us a rundown on that, but it's down like 50% in the last 2 or 3 years. Wind is down about 30, 35% in the last 5 years. So our costs are coming down not as quickly as solar has come down. So costs are coming into, there's a very interesting sort of harmonic convergence of all these costs, which makes a lot of really cool things possible. We're not there yet, though, and we gotta keep working at it. But what drives it is scale and getting a lot of projects done. The reason that iPhone in your pocket is so inexpensive is because we make so many of them. Why are why is the internal combustion engine in your car so cheap? Because we make gazillions of them a year. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing the same thing happen on the wind and solar side. But we still have gaps, and we don't have to pay for our externalities. And other guys, they don't pay for their externalities either. So that's another sort of pretty important dimension of this that I don't think we've touched upon yet.
But if I could just add one, while it's true that the costs are coming down, the price doesn't necessarily come down to the consumer. If you look at California, the costs have come way down for solar and for wind in California, but the price of electricity has gone way up, 18% over the last couple of years, because of various policies designed to use more renewables and so forth.
No, that's patently false. I mean, just to be clear, we've passed most of the RPSs between Michael and myself and a whole team of folks around the country. Every single RPS legislation that I know of in the country outside of California has a price-based trigger in it that says that if the Renewable Portfolio Standard raises rates by more than 2%, that the utility can get out of complying with that Renewable Portfolio Standard. The vast majority of rate increases that you've experienced in this country have come from replacing old coal with new coal, for instance. In Mississippi, they just raised rates 18% to pay for that new coal plant that came online this year. Same thing's true in Wisconsin, same thing's true in North Carolina. The nuclear plant in Georgia has already raised rates 18%, and they have no idea when that thing is going to come online. New transmission, for old transmission, union wages, copper, everything's more expensive. But solar and wind, I just think it's important for everyone in this audience to know, have not raised rates more than 1% total over the last 6 years on a countrywide basis.
No, I'm just making the point that there's a difference between price and cost.
Yeah, that's true.
And we have to take that into account. There's a lot of intermediation between the two, sometimes public policy, sometimes transmission and so forth. So we're not.
Listen, I will grant you that I believe that the renewable standards in California are costing ratepayers a little bit of money.
In California, that's right.
And I think it's a great investment, and there's lots of great positive externalities, but it is costing you some money. I don't know if it's all of the 18%, but it's some of that. In Texas, we actually have the reverse, because we have, this is Texas, so we got to brag about Texas, right, everybody? And we have such phenomenal wind resources that actually they help hold rates down a little bit. So it varies by state, but in California you're paying a little.
Oh, in California, you absolutely are.
Yeah, and that's not to say that's not the right decision. And in addition, it seems to be what people favor in California. So they're choosing that. But let me turn back to India and the group that's not covered by this, and that is small individuals who are often at subsistence level. We're talking about big states, rich country, but what about the same now in India?
Yes.
What policies are there policies either keeping these technologies away, or that should be put into place in order to bring these technologies to villages?
Okay. And like any other country where you see the problem, the policies are made to be implemented, and there are shortness. And just to be specific, on India side, if you can, okay, just go to the light slide. I love the light slide, okay, because that's a generic, and that's a one thing to take into the mass level. So the policies are done to one level where you are aware that it's megawatt plants of solar are being implemented, and even we tried putting into the hands, and then came to know that the grids jumping voltage jumps and frequency jumps makes the solar production not viable in the reality. Even though you can put 100 megawatt plant, but it is really producing what it's supposed to produce? That is the question. So even though there is a policy, but implementation is the issue. So what it comes down to that level is not only the village, but town or even cities. What it requires is more decentralization. That means when the policies start failing, whether in our country here or in India, you need to have little decentralization. And that's why I want to come to the last slide. So there is one product that I have, just get into the last slide. So this product we are distributing in this country, this is plug solar. And now let's get into the story. Now all of you are aware that solar panel price has come drastically over the last several years. And 10 years back, we used to think that if ever the solar panel price comes down to less than $1 per watt, we solve world's problem. Now it is much lower than $1 per watt, but we have not solved the world's problem. In fact, we don't see many solar panels in many homes. You agree with me? California have started seeing much more, but not many places. So what is lacking? The lacking is that even though material cost has come down drastically, but then your rest of the costs are still the same. So what we can do? We need to think a little bit.
No, that's right.
So when we thought about, we said that, okay, make it as easy as possible. Make the solar panel as an appliance. Just think about long time back, maybe when we needed a refrigerator, we might have to get it designed by some engineer, or have the refrigeration guy come to our home, fill up the freon, all bunch of things. And the cost would have been tremendous. An engineered product, what we love it. Now you go ahead, buy it, and bring it yourself or get somebody very cheap level, and then somebody hooks it up. That is the level the solar needs to come, and that is one of the dream that is coming forward. People are loving it. It's there. You might have. Now there is another part of it, Michael, I want to address, is that centralization is good. I mean, we need to work from all the sides, but where I see when I interact with the individual customers, where I see that people now are more scared that someday or other there will be Sandy, Katrina, Rita here, whole bunch of things will happen. And so they are scared. So they ask me that, okay, Sunil, can you come up with something that if the power fails, I still can get power without spending thousands of dollars? And whenever you think about power backup solution, it's a give and take $10,000. So they don't want to spend that, but they want to be protected. So what can be done so that in a couple of $100 or $1,000 or $2,000, their lives means their refrigerator, when we have gone through, the refrigerator doesn't work when there is power failure, whole bunch, we know all. So that is the level decentralization needs to happen. At the same time, centralization, we agree that the more utilities needs to get into the renewable energy. So that is the level it needs to come forward.
Hey, Joel, I just wanted to, sorry, Jigar.
No worries.
I just wanted to add something to that point. When I started off, I said that the next decade will be defined by economics, right? And I think some of these delivery models innovation in the delivery model is what is going to be needed, because right now you still have truck rolls happening. Half of the cost of a solar panel installation is still in the installation process, balance of system, etc. If you think about and this is probably a poor analogy in this case, but if you think about broadband penetration, early on you needed truck rolls for people to come into your home and install these things, and then it got to a place where they just send you stuff and you do it yourself. How far away that is, I don't know, but I think we're going to need these sorts of innovations for the penetration to go up. Within that cost structure, there's still a big difference, back to Michael's point on scale. Where in Germany they install 4,000 megawatts of solar every year for the last 8 years, that supply chain is incredibly mature, and they probably are projecting something in the $2.50 to $3 a watt installed for solar, where we are still at probably in the $4.50 to $5 a watt in the US. That's because of our fragmentation, maybe still not getting there in terms of the size of installations, and maybe just lack of experience. But I think those are all opportunities for the sector to get very much more competitive.
Can I make one more point? I just want to give people a broad understanding of what we're talking about here. I agree on the economics piece, but just indulge me for a second. I mean, the reason utility companies exist is because the federal government and then the state government said, we are going to give you a monopoly, and for that monopoly you will do a set of services. And those set of services are to connect people to the grid, all those other things. And there was a specific assumption, explicit assumption, that a centralized system would be cheaper than a decentralized system, right? Because of technology today, that is no longer true, right? And so when Mike says the gas on the margin might be 3 cents a kilowatt hour, he's right. When he says that central station wind might be 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour, he's right. And then you've got to pay for the transmission, distribution, et cetera. So to give you an example, in New York City, the transmission distribution charges on your bill have gone up by 50% in the last 7 years, whereas wholesale power prices have gone down in the last 7 years. But your net bill has actually gone up by 15–20%, right? So this notion that the reason solar is 7 cents and the reason why it's so much better than the other things to customers like Walmart is that Walmart doesn't have the ability to put a big central wind farm in its parking lot, right? It can't do that. And so what it can do is put solar on its roof.
Hold on a second. You got to grant me that if you're going to do a big box retailer with solar on the roof, you either have to have a ginormous, very expensive battery or a very robust connection to the grid.
Oh, no, I'm happy to grant you that for now. But I think but the point to me is basically that as soon as that equation, and it depends on whether you're in Hawaii, California, Texas, or Louisiana, as soon as that equation starts to fall apart and you can actually self-generate power by yourself or at the neighborhood level, cheaper than the utility can supply that power to you, whether it's because they made a crap load of mistakes over the last 15 years that you're still paying for, or whether it's because the actual technology is better, is beside the point. As soon as that happens, you will see these sophisticated customers start to migrate away from.
But we're not there yet.
Well, but this is why we have the fight.
To the original point, perhaps we're on that road. But
no, but this is why we have the fight, right? The reason Alec and the Koch brothers are spending so much money against the industry that I support and love is because they believe that the net metering that we get and some of the other benefits that we get are going to materially impact their cost structure, and that's happening. I mean, the load growth in the electric utility sector is now gone down to 0.6% a year on average, which means that when people thought that rates were going to go up by 2% a year, to make up for the lost revenue they projected, they're now going up at 4% a year. All I'm saying is that this train is moving, and we know exactly where the brick wall is that it's going to hit, and we can argue about how long that track length is, but we know where that brick wall is, and at the time at which it hits it.
Just for clarification, define the brick wall.
That at the time at which, no, it's a good question. At the time at which Walmart believes that it can self-generate power by state, cheaper than it can generate power, it can buy power from the grid, even if that means disconnecting, right? So in California today, I think you can actually disconnect your house from the grid more cost effectively than paying 24 cents a kilowatt hour to PG&E. Right, and you see that with Solar City and Tesla rolling that out in California. At the time at which that brick wall gets put in place, the electric utility industry they actually go into pure chaos, which is why the Edison Electric Institute wrote a report which it published in March saying exactly that at the time at which that occurred, that the electric utility 100-year-old business model would have to be radically changed to accommodate this innovation.
Yeah, so listen, I just want to point, I don't want to get into the, I don't want to bore our audience to tears with
they're excited. They're going to buy all this stuff.
I don't want to bore y'all too much with a doctrinal discussion of the virtues of net metering versus getting paid at wholesale rates for the solar power on your roof. But there is a debate, and you can be on a different side of the debate from where you are without being a Koch brother. Okay?
Oh no, I'm not. I didn't accuse you of being a Koch brother.
So no, I think, Michael and Joel, if I can just add, by the way, I had an over-under on my clock coming into this meeting saying, I don't know how many minutes are going to pass before we talk about net metering, and I lost. Admittedly, I lost. But I think just drawing the line at what Jigar said, I do think is an important line for the utility sector, right, which is industry, right, which is at the point in time when I can clearly go off the grid and I can actually be sustainable myself being off the grid.
Then you'll get off the grid.
Right,
if you can
with energy storage and everything, right? It is actually a critical and clear threat to that sector, and I think I think people are basically just now waking up to it, but I think they will understand that threat over time. It's this sort of thing is played out in multiple sectors, whether it's in the Blockbuster situation or the U.S. Postal Service with its big fixed costs and trying to deliver parcels to everybody from a universal service standpoint. Yeah. That story has repeated itself in multiple places. The question is, where is that point in time? And I think the dividing line is unclear in terms of the timeline, and it's going to vary by market. But I do think it is an important line.
Yeah, no, I completely agree that at the point in time where it's economical to get off the grid, people will get off the grid, and they should be absolutely permitted to do so.
That's going to be a big fight.
To the extent that people are not off the grid and they're connected to the grid for backup power or for nighttime use or whatever, they should pay for that. And what's happening in places with net metering like California, there's a cross subsidization where wealthy people put solar panels on their roof and people who are not wealthy do not.
Casting aspersions. Our average income for solar in this country is $55,000 a year household income. So don't be giving me all this, we're only serving the wealthy. Most of these people in here are making way more than $55,000.
No, I think Jigar, just I would actually...
We would love to dwell on this interesting point. However, we're gonna go to the questions.
We promised to. We knew that we were talking after lunch. People might fall asleep. We had to keep them on their toes.
Yes, absolutely. And one point I would like to point out, I counted up at one point the number of regulators in the United States for electricity across the country, and stopped at 1,500 because of the complexity of the way energy is regulated in the United States. Federal, state, local, all kinds of regulations. So we have a condition in which regulation is an issue. But let me turn to the questions from the audience, which are coming in. Wow. we may not have generated answers, but we sure generated questions. So first question, we just heard from ExxonMobil at lunch that only 5% of all energy will be delivered by wind, solar in 2040. Does the panel agree or disagree?
Well,
clearly I disagree.
I think we can all agree that we disagree.
Okay. Okay, this one is done. So,
I mean, just to put a finer point on that, today we're at almost 5% wind and solar in the electric power sector. Now, this ExxonMobil number is all energy. Electric power usage in the United States is around 39% of our energy needs. So we're at like 2 and change of our energy needs coming from wind and solar, can we sort of double that in the next 30 years? I mean, I hope so, geez.
Well, and one other point there is that Germany, Japan, Denmark, all the countries that we mentioned went from, whatever they were sort of in the 90s to today in the last 7 years, right? So they've actually went from sort of like 4% penetration to, I think Germany's now 23% penetration renewables in the last 7 years. So this notion that it takes multi-decades to make this change and yada, yada, yada is
well, and certainly because the technology's there, it makes the transition easier. So here, another question, is cost coming down only on photovoltaic, which are the panels, or are there comparable price reductions in solar thermal?
I mean, I'm an investor in solar thermal, so I can say, I mean, I think if he's talking about CSP plants, which is concentrating solar PV, which is the big billion-dollar projects like BrightSource and others have done, those costs are not coming down. But if you're talking about solar hot water panels, which Israel, Barcelona, Greece, lots of places mandate, and the largest market in the world for that is China, actually. The U.S. is woefully behind on deploying solar hot water, and so is India. And that problem will get rectified in the next 10 years.
I can add something to it. It so happens that my other company is on hot water. And,
in hot water or on hot
water? Now you're in hot water with your investors.
Now that I'm in hot water, on hot water. So
on hot water, okay.
So it so happens that what is, again, the new technology which is coming forward is basically, I coin it as air energy. So pulling heat out of the air, which is heat pump, water heaters. And that is coming big way in the country. Yep. And that is playing, economics is playing big role in that. And so the technology is changing, again renewable, but indirect solar. That means it's depending upon the air and pulling the heat out of the air.
That's great.
So what do you see as the role of subsidies in growth of solar and wind, especially in emerging economies? How should the policies be constructed, in other words, around subsidies for the emerging markets?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. I think that if you're generating electricity with diesel, this is a really easy question, because you can produce in many locales, you can produce electricity a lot more cheaply with wind and solar. So that's a very easy policy decision from my perspective.
I mean, but just, the cross-subsidization part just confuses the crap out of people, though. I mean, this is important. If you think about India right now and the percentage of their grid that comes from diesel, it's huge. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but it's huge, right? I mean, in Pune, for instance, where they're constantly screwed by the fact that Mumbai gets 100% power, they've actually got a system where all of the local electric utility can actually turn on people's generators at the industrial sites and then reimburse them for their costs for doing that, just to keep 100% power on in Pune. If you add solar and wind any part of that grid in India, and you have the ability to show that it's going to reduce the number of run hours of diesel somewhere else on that grid, you are fully justified in paying 7, 8, 9, 10 rupees per kilowatt hour for that power, because it's totally cost effective. This notion that we're competing with coal, which the Indian government just basically by administrative things cut about 90% of all of the coal plants' licenses, not because they did it on purpose, but because Coal India can't actually provide the coal, and they don't have enough water for the freshwater cooling. There's this, even on the grid, between 5 and 8% of all electricity generated in the world comes from liquid fuels, and so that's about $1 trillion market for us just by itself.
I think. Sorry, go ahead.
Jigar, just adding to that with my experience, yes, the solar is coming. Still, in the cities, it's not being implemented fully, because the cities, they run the air conditioner, and so the solar is unable to. So the key for all that is advanced battery, advanced storage. And at this moment, it is true that in India, nobody has come forward for advanced battery manufacturing. So that is the base is that coming forward with advanced storage technology and taking that solar, that is a solution. Give you one example. Many parts of the India, particularly summer, you get you get electric power for a few hours, and most of the homes in cities, they have what is called inverter system, backup system. Yeah. And which needs 8-10 hours of charging, but the electric power is for 4 hours. So it goes little bit, many of you have experienced it, comes in the evening for 1 or 2 hours, and then your inverter system, battery system is unable to sustain it. If you have an advanced battery storage system, what happens is 1 or 2 hours of even electric coming into the homes is sufficient to give you 24 hours of the full charge. And so the key factor again to the technology is that is what needs to be emphasized is the advanced battery.
Right, but don't make this more important than it is, right? India is 60,000 megawatts short on power. Yeah. We have the ability to build 10,000 megawatts a year of solar, wind, geothermal, et cetera, in India tomorrow if we wanted to do it. There's enough people trained in India, construction firms, capacity, money, all of those things ready to go. The problem that we have is a bunch of IIT engineers in India who are telling me that advanced batteries are the way we have to do things, as opposed to actually deploying what we have right now on scale. So China is doing 10,000 megawatts a year, and I'm arguing with you about advanced batteries. I'm not willing to exceed any one of these points. And India's got to get their crap together and actually start building power plants that we already know how to do.
And that's a very good point. Let's just get.
How many more questions? How many more questions do we have?
Next question.
What's the panel's view about the state of storage right now? I'm not talking about where it's going to go, but you're saying it's adequate.
I've made 2 investments this last year in storage, both of which are commercial right now with the existing programs. So one is solar grid storage here in the PJM territory, which is Washington, D.C., New Jersey. They're selling ancillary services to the independent system operator, so frequency control, voltage, things like that. The other company is called STEM in California, which is doing demand-side management, and so they're putting battery systems on the customer side of the meter and saving them demand charges. They're using off-the-shelf technology, LG Chem, stuff like that, hugely profitable, right? So there are going to be rings of demand every year where maybe that market I'm going after now is maybe $1 billion total that can be done cost effectively, and then as the technology gets better, that number will be 10 billion, and as technology gets better, it'll be 100 billion. But there are huge opportunities right now for battery storage, to go in now.
What's your view on storage?
No, I think, Joel, just adding to what Jigar said, there is some technology development to go depending on the use cases and applications, but it comes back down to there is technology that works today that is economic in certain use cases. The PJM example is a good one. There will be, by the way, right now in Germany, at the home, energy storage is actually economic because there's a huge delta between the retail power prices and what the wholesale power prices are. And if all I'm trying to deal with is the intermittency of solar, I can easily install in my home existing energy storage technologies that takes care of that intermittency, right? So I think it really comes back down to drive the penetration and adoption, get the technology costs down, and then you will see concentric circles of increasing demand. And this is, by the way, no different than what happened in wind or what happened in solar rooftop, right? I mean, it's the same curve. Yep. We just need to kind of do the same thing in the energy storage space.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's more nascent than you guys are. I'm glad you're investing in it, and but it's, the numbers that you hear that it costs like $500 a kilowatt hour, and it needs to get down to like 100. So we got a ways to go, but as you point out, at each step of the way, the market gets broader and broader. So we got a ways to go. But in the way most people's heads work, which is, okay, the sun is shining right now, I'm going to store electricity and then turn these batteries on at night. That's really, really expensive. Some of these other small uses, like a couple of seconds of storage for ancillary services, supporting the grid in certain situations, yeah, that stuff is coming in. It's very important to develop it because it helps us get the scale, which will bring down costs. But the kind of classic, like, okay, I turn this battery on and off, 12 hours on, 12 hours off, that is a long ways off.
Yeah, that's a long. Okay? But AES has done hundreds of millions of dollars worth of battery storage at their natural gas facilities just on the capacity payment. arbitrage, right?
There's niche situations, but this classic that people imagine in their heads, it's a ways off.
We have a question here for Sunil, but I think others might be interested too in different contexts. So this is in the context of India. Essentially, what the question is, what's the cost per house of using solar? Particularly, I'm assuming with your technology and what you're describing.
Puneet, can you get into the last slide? Okay, thank you. Now, what you see here is sufficient for every home. I'm talking about the cities, and every home in India and in Mexico that we are now getting into. This is what is needed. Now, this is not sufficient in this country. You need 3 times of this on an average, but in India, this is sufficient. However, again, I repeat, with the existing technologies, this is not possible. It has to be some advancement, which technology we have already. We just need to implement it. Putting another example into it. Let's say at this moment we see...
What does that cost?
The cost of that one in rupees term will be somewhere from 60,000 rupees to 1 lakh, which is 100,000 rupees. That's per watt basis. The per watt basis in India, the cost will come down to about $1.50 per watt.
Yeah. I mean, just to answer the question a different way, there's 300 million people in India that don't have access to electricity. Another 300 million people who have technical access to electricity but never get power through their line. For those people, a lantern costs about $9 today that actually lasts for some period of time. That's of decent quality, right? So $9, they pay about 85 cents per satchel of kerosene, so 9 satchels or 12 satchels of kerosene basically pays it off. If you want to go higher and you want to get a ceiling fan, color television, using advanced circuitry that like Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory has done so that they're only drawing less than, I think, 25 watts now. So you can see your ZTV and all that stuff. You're up to, which you know is why they're actually doing it, right? So it's not for the light. That's going to cost somewhere in the neighborhood of between $60 and $100 for that solar home system, if you want to do a solar home system. So just in orders of magnitude, for the people who are at the 300 million people who don't have access to electricity, or the 300 million people who are technically connected but not getting power.
So here's a question for Michael. What are the challenges that Cleanline is facing to build transmission lines?
How much time we got?
Well, that's a softball, Michael.
So, our principal challenges are the economics are pretty much there. This dynamic of very low-cost wind and plus our cost to get it to market with our wires, those numbers basically work. It's really around the state regulatory processes and our federal process. So we have those 1,500 regulators. We know all of them, and we have to know all of them and what their needs are to put our projects together. So that's the main issue. And then there are hundreds and hundreds of landowners that we have to work with in order to site our facilities, and those discussions take a long time, and we have to be very careful about how we site these projects and work well with many different stakeholders. So it's really a long stakeholder-driven process. It takes just a long time to put it together. The exciting thing, though, is if we're able to build these projects, it'll facilitate a lot of new economic development on the other side. The other piece of it, and I think this is universal to both the discussions in the U.S. context and the Indian context, is none of us with experience in the industry, and nobody in the audience, should underestimate the challenges associated with working and trying to bring about innovation in an industry which is both heavily regulated and whose actors or whose primary protagonists are monopoly providers. That combination of ingredients, okay? And sometimes you get all of those in one, a government-owned monopoly service provider. That creates a lot of challenges for innovation. And when we're talking about costs that are coming down so quickly that even those of us at the kind of the bleeding edge of the industry have a hard time keeping up. Imagine how difficult it is for these ginormous companies and regulators to keep up with this pace of change. That is one of the hardest things about, and this is, I'm sort of, you know, if the theme of the conference is inspiring innovation, that is an area where it's hard to find inspired innovation at times. And it's because their sort of reward system is set up to be very, very conservative and not particularly innovation driven.
So just to remind everyone that this is an IIT event, the question is, what is your opinion about the role played by 24-volt USB cable distribution systems in the future?
Well, to answer that, it's because I don't know how many people know Armstrong roofing or Armstrong ceilings. So when you go into your, sort of your office building and you have those drop ceilings, they have a product now where the metal grid is actually a 24-volt distribution system. And all of your, it's already commercial. You can buy it right now out of their catalog. And all of your things hanging off their ceiling, like sprinkler systems, smoke alarms, sensors, all that stuff can run off of 24 volt. Everything in your cube can run 24 volts. So as you guys all know, the big blocks that are part of your charging cords are all units that turn AC into DC power. So all of your computers, cell phones, everything are actually running DC. And the losses in that are enormous. Lighting as well. Most of the ballasts in the lighting system converts grid voltage to DC power back to 400 volts AC before it powers your light. And so those are two-step changes where you can save 10, 11, 12% of the energy. So this is a well-studied field, very, very mature, not commercially taking off right now. Mostly, I think, just because people are genuinely confused about whether they can do it, is it legal, how do we do it, et cetera. But the technology's there, and there are actually major billion-dollar suppliers that can supply it to you.
So here's one, Patabi. What's the role of biofuels, biomass in renewables and so forth? Is there a role? What is the role? How do you see it?
I thought we were going to keep the topic fairly focused, but I'll stay out of the biofuels debate for a second. But I do think biomass, and again, very location dependent, but biomass has a big role to play. And again, when you start looking at micro turbines that can run off of biomass and whatnot, and just another form of decentral energy, just one more beyond the solar rooftop. And I think those will also achieve higher levels of penetration over time. Again, depends on the use cases and what locations do they make sense. It goes back to, always things go back to where are the resources and can I get a connection closest to the resources and where they are. So you won't see mass scale adoption of it.
Good. This is for Jigar. Price of solar has come down in the last 3 years by 50%. What would be the price roadmap for the next 5 or 10 years? How do you see prices going for solar?
Well, I mean, just to talk about the U.S. for a second, Walmart today gets solar for about $1.85 a watt installed, all in to the contractor. I'm investing in projects in Dallas.
Give us a kilowatt hour without any incentives or anything. I think that's
so at $1.85 a watt installed, which is what Walmart's doing now. That's about 40% of the entire United States of America's retail rates being cost effective without subsidies. So that's something on the order of around 13 cents a kilowatt hour unsubsidized. Today. And that number is projected to go to about $1.63 a watt in sort of 2016, 2017.
In 10 years?
in 10 years, I hope it's flat, because I think the thing with solar, what solar needs right now is actually to go up in cost a little bit in terms of hiring salespeople that get paid 4 times more than they get paid now, so they can push it out in the marketplace. Getting the kind of professionalism that we don't quite have right now, and so I think our costs have to actually go up a little bit. So as the equipment costs come down, you'll see SG&A costs go up a little bit to be able to actually push this stuff out in the marketplace, pay more for marketing and sales. But on the residential side, in Dallas right now, I'm investing in projects that are 285 a watt installed. So it's not a California, New Jersey thing. Even in Dallas, you can get to 285 a watt. A company called DFW Solar that's doing it. And that number can easily come down to $2 a watt within sort of the 3 to 5 year time frame. There's a lot of the stuff that Sunil's talking about and other things that can simplify residential. But the big thing that residential is plagued with right now is the cost of capital is much, much higher than for a Walmart store. And that's going to change radically in the next 3 years with securitization. Solar City just did the first securitization of $54 million worth of bonds, and then SunEdison's doing a securitization, I think, in April. So I think you're seeing the cost of capital come down greatly for residential, which will bring the cost per kilowatt hour down. And that translates to something on the order of around 16 to 17 cents a kilowatt hour with residential. And so, I think that, and that's pretty cost effective for many people around the country.
So last question, and this is for the panel. Does the industry survive without government subsidies? Are we at that point?
And I've written an op-ed that says that we thrive without government subsidies. That right now we're actually being held back in the U.S. by the 30% tax credit because there's so few people that can actually monetize a tax credit. There's only 23 investors in the entire United States of America that have invested more than $100 million into solar. This is against the fact that we're going to do, I don't know, something on the order of around $14 billion of solar this year in the U.S. So 23 investors total. And so that means our cost of capital goes way up because we are sort of restricted by whatever those guys want to charge. So I do think that once the 30% tax credit goes away in 2016, you're going to see a flood of capital coming in that's really just cash on cash return capital, like pension fund money, insurance company money, and others that come in.
Others agree, disagree?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sunil?
Yeah, I do agree that even 2016, the 30% tax credit goes away, or many things goes away. But then it's possible that your solar energy credits may go up, and that will offset what tax credit goes away, and with the solar energy tax credits. So solar energy credits. So we don't really in 2 years need any government incentives. As a matter of fact, if it is possible to even lower the regulation from utility side, which are many times, or building department size, which are really creating issues in many of the practical ways, very well, it becomes much easier.
Joel, what I'll just say is that, look, I think subsidies, what we've shown historically in the U.S. doesn't matter whether it's energy or any other sector. Once they're there, they're somehow a cottage industry grows around them, and they never appear to go away, right? But to answer your question in the most pure way, I'd say I do believe if subsidies go away, the industry finds ways to get more competitive. That doesn't mean that you're going to see suddenly 5 times or 10 times more installations because subsidies went away, because that that may not necessarily hunt logically, but I do think the industry will become more competitive, find ways to become more competitive, and therefore you'll start seeing more penetration.
Michael, you have a comment on that?
Well, I think what would happen with both wind and solar is you'd see a fairly dramatic drop-off in the short term, say for a couple of years, and then once that sort of penetrated the market, 2 things would pick up for that. One is there's state goals around renewable energy supply, and those would provide enough demand that it would keep both industries going along quite nicely. I think you'd see some efficiencies in the value chain, and particularly on the finance side, that would make up for part of it. And then for those So the electric power sector, there's two types of utility. There's sort of the regulated and the deregulated. In deregulated markets, people really rely a lot more on sort of very short-term price signals. So they're going to think about, okay, natural gas is $4 today. And those, as it happens, those markets often have state renewables goals. So things would play out, I think, in a sort of reasonable way. In other instances where you've got vertically integrated utilities where the utility owns the generation, the transmission, the distribution, those typically do what are called integrated resource plans. So they're mapping out what's going to happen for the next 30 years. And when you do that sort of exercise, you very quickly come to the conclusion that a pretty decent slice of renewables, both wind and solar, may not be the cheapest short-term product available, but it is a really important part of the portfolio if you want price stability, and if you want low regulatory risk, if you want zero carbon risk, and you want an overall portfolio that performs well as you stress it under a bunch of different scenarios. So I think there's a future, but you would pay a penalty over a couple of years while all this stuff got sorted out.
Well, with that, we'll close. Thank you very much to all the panelists. Let's give a big round of applause to all of them. And I also thank all of you, the audience, who find time to come to this session. And panelists, special thanks to Jigar and Patabi, who flew in from New York and Dallas this morning. And on behalf of the IIT 2013 conference, we would like to present a gift to these speakers as a token of our appreciation. And for this, I invite Prabir Ghosh, President and CEO of Invest, which is a nonprofit team largely made of IITians around the world, and whose mission is to enable massive scale sustainable energy. Prabir, please.
I would say that was one of the most interesting panel sessions I've been to.
Thanks for that.
The only thing I hope is there's no liquids in this, because I'm not going to check my box in for the... If it's a nice bottle of wine, I might consider checking it in.
Exactly. I think it's a pair of running shoes.
Thank you so much.